Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Innovations in International Philanthropy Symposium. You are participating in the Disaster Response Cluster discussion, and we're very happy that you are with us today. We have Dr. Valerie Bemo, who oversees the Emergency Response Program at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And we also have Sarah Rich, who is representing the Women's Refugee Commission and will be bringing us some great information from a recent case study and review that the team has just completed. So we are bringing you this conversation in the midst of a very dynamic period in really the history of humanitarian response, but particularly a moment, a critical juncture for the humanitarian response sector. It's a time when there are record levels of need around the world. Over the current global, the UN need is over $36 billion worldwide. This year, less than 20% of that is being funded. We are seeing record levels of storms, of floods, and drought around the world. And that is not even taking into account the civil wars and conflicts that we continue to see. So in the midst of that, this past year brought another level of crisis in the pandemic, the worldwide pandemic, COVID-19. So we're at this moment where we're seeing the challenges unlike any before in the history of our world and humanitarian sector. So what we would like to do is really look at what kind of innovations are needed. What are the areas that we need to develop? How can we help this current crisis within a crisis and put forward new opportunities for a different way of responding to crisis around the world? One that also includes localized approaches. So what I would like to do right now is introduce or share the mic with Valerie Bemo, and she will take us to the next section of this presentation.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for having me here today. And today I just really wanted to really give the context. I'm working with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and a few years ago we set a series of innovative project or innovation in humanitarian sector that we know is not always an easy way, and this was really focusing on refugee and internally displaced population that we have. And in that perspective, we worked really closely with the Women Refugee Commission in the Borno state, where you know there's a big number of internally displaced people due to conflict and the crisis. And in that sense, we worked closely with Sarah to put together this innovative project, but also to really capture what are we learning and how, not just about the impact of the project himself, but also the process. And this is the pleasure that Sarah is here today after almost 3 years of implementing the project. And I would like to ask you, Sarah, we have been really looking at this project. Can you tell us a bit more about the Women Refugee Commission? And what was the rationale of the project? I gave a little bit of background, but tell us a little bit what the context of the project in Borno and what exactly were you implementing?
Yeah, thanks, Valerie. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'm very happy to be here. The Women's Refugee Commission is a small research and advocacy organization based in New York, and we aim to improve the lives of women, children, and adolescents who are affected by crises by making systematic improvements to the humanitarian system and also now in the humanitarian development nexus. We've had a long history of working through partnerships and coalitions, both globally and at the country level in humanitarian settings around the world. So for this particular project, I'll share a little bit about the context where we're working, the goals and objectives of the projects, and the approach that we took. So the context is Borno State, Nigeria, which, as you may know, has been in armed conflict for around 12 years now, resulting in quite a lot of displacement. As of this May, there were over 1.6 million people who were displaced. And it's had a huge impact on the health sector. Only 43% of health facilities were fully functioning as of 2019. And we also see shortages of highly qualified health providers like doctors and nurses. So the project is a 4-year investment to support the Borno State government to develop and implement a community-based health program called the Village Health Program, along with a set of complementary primary health interventions. And we had 2 key objectives for the project. The first was really to expand coverage of health services, spanning across reproductive, maternal, newborn, child, adolescent health, and nutrition. And then to use the project to really inform programming in other fragile and complex settings globally. So the approach of the project is really, I think, what's most unique about it. It supports direct health service delivery in a conflict-affected setting, but the Women's Refugee Commission, as the international NGO working on this project, we are not an implementing partner. We don't provide any direct services in any place where we work. Instead, the Borno State government is the implementing partner on the grant. And this is a really new way of working in the humanitarian sector with the INGO in kind of more of this behind the scenes role, providing kind of coordination, grant management, technical support, and that sort of thing. And we designed this project this way to really centralize local ownership, local commitment, and sustainability, to put those pieces really at the forefront of this humanitarian project.
Thank you, Sarah. As you rightly saw, this this is really different from the way you have been operating before. And we also know, as Mike mentioned, a lot of the international humanitarian sector have been looking at how do we work differently? How do we include more local or national institutions? And like you said, usually you don't implement, but you work with international NGOs. And in this one, working directly with the government and local partners. How did you manage to do the work? What was the role that you see on government and partner, and what did you learn from the partnership in this new way of approaching the work?
So we ended up developing a consortium of partners. And as I said, the Borno State government was the implementing partner in this consortium. And then we brought on several other organizations, mostly local organizations, to play various technical support roles. So we had a project management partner, an M&E expert, a supply chain technical partner, a policy partner, and we also temporarily brought in a community health program design expert to help us ensure that we were aligning all of our program materials to international standards. So the whole project was implemented with this consortium approach, with the government implementing the project and each partner contributing their respective expertise and WRC providing kind of overall coordination and management. And we recently hired an external evaluator to help us understand, how did this go? Was this partnership approach successful? What were the challenges? And what are some of the recommendations that we can draw out of this project to inform the humanitarian sector? So most of what I'm sharing today comes from the evaluator's findings. I'm also bringing in some of the Women's Refugee Commission's own synthesis of our lessons learned as well. So I'll start with some successes. The first is really engaging the government. So with the government positioned as the implementing partner, they were very much actively engaged from the very beginning. So we had an agreed scope of work with them and a financial agreement that kind of laid out what the respective roles and responsibilities were. And then we really saw that commitment increase over time as the project moved along. So we did see that the government allocated their own staff to specifically work on this project and to be focal points in other areas within the project. So we saw commitment from the beginning and increasing over time. Then the second success that the evaluator drew out was really in the makeup of the consortium. So here I want to kind of point to the type of grant structure that we had in place with the Gates Foundation. We had this long-term and flexible grant structure that really allowed us to invest significant time up front in identifying who we wanted to bring into the consortium. So including identifying what expertise was needed and which partners were best positioned to bring that to the table. And this really allowed us to do a pretty thorough mapping of organizations based in Borno State and based in Nigeria and bring on board primarily local partners. So our approach was to bring in partners as much as we could who were based in Borno State. Then we looked nationally, and only then did we look globally to bring in international partners. So we really only have one other INGO in the consortium. And the local partners brought such a strong understanding of the context of the stakeholders and how processes work, as well as the community needs in the settings where we were working, which facilitated a successful program and also really strengthened local commitment and local ownership of this program. The third success that I want to highlight is the co-design process. So in the proposal design phase, we knew that, that the goal was to support the government to implement a community-based health program. But we had a significant amount of flexibility to be able to decide exactly what all of those details were going to look like. So once we had the consortium together, we were therefore then able to work with the local partners on every decision in deciding what this program would look like. So exactly what was the scope of the health services, what did the training curriculum look like? And this really fostered a high level of buy-in from the government and other local partners from the beginning, because they were involved at a very early stage. And then the last success that I'll talk about is the consortium's communications and decision-making processes, which, as everything adjustments were made over time. We really prioritized relationship building and consortium management from the beginning. So we always had bilateral meetings with each of our partners. We added in monthly consortium meetings and quarterly strategic retreats for bringing all of the partners together to make bigger decisions together. And I'll say that actually, initially, there was some confusion around who was responsible for what types of decisions within this program, because WRC was the prime on the grant, but the government was in the role of the implementing agency, and WRC was very committed to ensuring that things were locally driven. So we didn't want to just be a decision maker. So together with the partners, we developed this consensus-driven decision-making guidance document that we think helped clarify roles and responsibilities, and that the evaluator confirmed also did clarify those roles and responsibilities. And it put WRC and the Borno State government jointly together, really, in the decision-making role. So then, of course, we also had some challenges along the way. It was a very new way of working, and we learned a lot as we went along. The timeline was very long for humanitarian action. It was a 4-year project, and that really allowed us to achieve this health program through a localized way of working. But there were still challenges in terms of the scope of what we were trying to do, including strengthening capacity, change management, and the sustainability of the program. So from the beginning, it took us fully a year approximately to assemble the consortium, and then sometime beyond that to go through this co-design process. Both of those are kind of time-consuming, lengthy processes. So the program itself didn't launch until well into the grant period. So that left us with somewhat less time to then iterate the program and advocate for its sustainability. We also found that it was difficult to simultaneously conduct program design and implementation along with that kind of advocacy to sustain the program before there was a proof of concept or evidence of effectiveness. So some of the sustainability outcomes, particularly in terms of financial investments from the Borno State government, were difficult for us to achieve within this time frame. So we certainly had a mix of successes and challenges, but overall, we do think the model was quite successful in implementing health programming in a complicated setting through a localized approach. And we hope that it can be used to inform programming in the humanitarian sector and in the humanitarian development nexus as well.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. It's good to see hard, transformative, but still learning process for you as an organization, but also the whole sectors. But we know also the project started before COVID-19, and all of us have been impacted. What additional challenges did you find or face during the COVID, and how did you address them?
Yeah, COVID, of course, threw a wrench into everything. And in this project, we had to adapt both the community health program itself, as well as the way the consortium functioned. So for the community health program, we developed alternative service delivery protocols, and we provided training to ensure the safety of our village health workers as well as their communities. So for example, we instituted a policy of having the village health workers first call households before visiting to make sure that no one was having any symptoms. And we, of course, had to procure masks and provide them to the village health workers. So this actually required quite a lot of flexibility on our part with the government, because we needed to shift the budget around to be able to procure masks. And we also needed to be able to accommodate things like providing data, phone and data credit to the village health workers so that they could actually make those advanced phone calls. So those were the types of things we did to adjust the community health model, but we also had to adapt the way we work together as a consortium. So all of our meetings became virtual, at least the ones with WRC, the international colleagues. And troubleshooting those technology issues definitely took time and flexibility. So for example, we actually also had to make sure we provided internet and phone data to our partners too, who don't necessarily have reliable internet access in their workplaces, let alone in their homes. So that took some time, and it took a while for partners to feel fully comfortable using Zoom and other technologies to conduct these kinds of meetings. We did still find it quite challenging to conduct some of the more high-level stakeholder meetings during COVID, but overall, I do think we were able to continue operations even during COVID. And in fact, if anything, COVID just kind of even pushed forward faster the localization aims that we've seen in the humanitarian sector as well as in this project.
Thank you, Sarah. Definitely, I think sometimes we take it for granted, our access to technology, but in a lot of places in the world, it's not a reality. And it's important for all of us to be aware of the situation. If I want to come to you quickly, maybe in 1 or 2 minutes, rapidly, as a donors, as me as a Gates Foundation and the Philanthropy and other donors, what would be your recommendation for working humanitarian and to look at the local partnership, innovation, and how does it make it a reality? What are some of the few things you need to tell us?
Yeah, so I mean, I do think that this approach to centering local partners as implementing and technical leads has been successful overall. Local partners provide that strong understanding of the context and community needs. With the consortium model, partners were able to leverage their unique expertise to really strengthen the government's capacity to be able to implement community health programming for its own citizens. And positioning the government as the implementing agency in this project definitely facilitated government buy-in, as would be expected. So we do think that we hope that donors will be interested in scaling up this kind of model and or applying it in other settings to see how replicable it is. And I do want to say that in doing this, it's so important to have this flexible long-term grant structure that we had. So we were able to both engage partners and develop program details after the grant was awarded, which allowed us to bring in local partners at a much earlier stage and to really co-design the program with them, both of which we think enhance the success of the program. We do recognize that taking on greater flexibility does also mean, in some cases, assuming more risk. And I just want to note that, more flexibility doesn't necessarily mean a blank check. We were always accountable for achieving what we set out to achieve. We just had some flexibility in the way that we did it. And as we shifted our approach, we were always in communication with the Gates Foundation, with Valerie along the way. So we hope that that this project can help inform future investments to become more locally driven, and we'll be happy to continue sharing evidence as it becomes available. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah, for giving us a clear example of how working innovate while working with local partnership, while implementing security area, while implementing COVID, pose challenges, but it's also pose us present us with the big opportunity. And Mike, maybe just a few reflections from our experience, not just with this project, but in general, when we're thinking about the relief on disaster relief in the way we are working on the humanitarian. What are some of the few things you taking from this conversation so that we can actually recommend in general?
Yeah, I think the first takeaway is related to the grand bargain and the idea that all international organizations are trying to work more with local organizations. It's a great statement and it's a great intention, but there's no clear path. And what I think Sarah helped provide was really pulling out some practical lessons and some tips on how to work, how to make that actual happen. I love the part about sharing the decision-making with the government, really putting that in writing and coming up with a framework on how being very transparent on how decisions are going to be made. The part about the consensus building and in terms of the flexibility of creating this project as time went on. So it required flexibility of the donor and flexibility of the implementers and really flexibility of the local organizations really to adapt to this process as it was moving forward. The time flexibility also is important, that as this is a new path, that the time frames are going to change, and maybe the project clarity won't be done the same way that the project was written. There has to be a bit of flexibility as time goes on to create based on what the actual context is and the reality. So I feel like and being able to do all this in the midst of COVID, Sarah said it kind of helped push things forward, but I think it just speaks to the possibility that this can be done, and the shift to have greater ownership at the local level, how vital it is in light of all the problems that we're having on the international level. It's, this is, really speaking to the path forward. So I think we got some good tips here.
Thank you, Mike. And I think when I look at the disaster response, and because I worked in the space and also as a foundation, one of the things that is really clear, we know that there's an increase of disaster, as you mentioned, Mike, and also with each increase of disaster, there's an increase of people wanting to give, or philanthropy feeding. But also we know it's not easy, and we know that the situation changed so rapidly that the critical part of flexibility is essential when you want to respond to disaster. But we also know that the local community themselves, the people themselves, the community are there before the crisis, during and after. And how much we can manage to reach to them rapidly is the best way to respond and to sustain the response. But also as donors, it's not always easy because there's so many places, so many things. How do we start preparing our system to have that flexibility, taking the risk, while also have our due diligence and respect and be accountable? Because I think it's money and we have to be accountable to the people who put the money in the place. And with this, I probably will ask all our audience, how do you work in with local partners when you're doing response? What process do you have in your organization for flexible taking risk or working with different local organizations? And what are some of the the challenges you're still facing, and how do we start really have that conversation as philanthropists? Thank you. And Mike, maybe a last word and we'll close here.
Well, I just want to say thank you to Sarah. Thanks for sharing your organization's experiences and your personal experiences. This was very helpful. Valerie, of course, always great to share a panel with you and really pick up from your insights, and both with the foundation and in the field. I think really we touched on a lot of areas. I think the bottom line is around flexibility and taking on a bit more risk as funders. So really, I think this next section here, we'd like to hear from those in the audience about their experiences. How do they resonate, and what how do they see moving forward? So thanks everyone. We look forward to engaging with you.